this gets out of control, I'm gonna make a prediction, and I'm awesome at my predictions because I'm never wrong. You will have two things happen. One, you will have American citizens shot, whether by accident, accidental discharge. The M18, M17 pistol, which is the SIG P320, has been known now to accidentally discharge by not even handling it, but by bumping it. So we're going to get a troop who shoots himself, has a negligent discharge as he's trying to unload an M4 without a clearing barrel, or accidentally shoots a civilian because he's ready to do it and he thinks that there's a gun and he's not a cop and it's against the law. The other thing you're going to have is rebellion. You're going to have mutiny. You're going to have officers, senior enlisted who are going to go, hey, whoa, this is not us clearing out sandbags for a flood. This is unlawful and I'm not going to take part in this.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes, and today we're joined by Malcolm Nance, intelligence and foreign policy analyst and a former cryptologic intelligence officer in the US Navy. He's also an expert in national security and a veteran of the war in Ukraine. Malcolm, thank you very much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
Well, Trump is looking to expand his use of National Guardsmen in law enforcement roles in US cities. Do you think there's really a justification for that at the moment in the US? And should people be worried about US Guardsmen on the streets?
Let me make this as clear as possible day. I mean, I've spent going on 40 years in national security in the United States, including 20 years on active duty. None of this is justified. Zero, zip, nada, none of it. And those of you who are in the service, you all know what it's like to have a senior enlisted, sergeant major character who will sit there and not BS you. I am not BSing you. This situation is unprecedented, all right, because there is no risk or threat. This is Donald Trump seizing control of the armed forces in order to do a television play for guys who are out in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or Ames, Iowa, using the resources, by the way, which is against the Constitution of the United States. You cannot use U.S. soldiers in the United States in a law enforcement capacity unless there is a civil war or a state of emergency. And we have state of emergencies all the time. When a hurricane destroys a city, like in Hurricane Katrina, or when flash floods come through, this is the non-combat function of the National Guard. But to have the National Guard in the streets of the United States, I mean, it's outrageous. That is the only way to describe it. It is a power grab, and he thinks that he's going to be using it like, I don't know, the Waffen SS to put down what? There is no crime. Washington, D.C.'s crime rate is 30% what it was. I was just in Washington. I'm going back again. You can walk around that city anywhere, with the exception of the southeast portion of the city, where, by the way, all of these cops, National Guardsmen, are not in the southeastern section of the city where crime is the highest at all. And they have a police force. The Washington, D.C. police force is very capable of containing the activities they had. This is Donald Trump pushing the United States towards a totalitarian takeover of major urban areas.
And what have we seen in DC so far? I mean, there are reports that the crime rate hasn't really been affected by this, and that there's not been so much happening yet. And there's now suggestions that Trump wants to put in beautification regime, so guardsmen could be picking up litter and cleaning graffiti. Is that the kind of thing you'd usually expect National Guardsmen to be doing?
No. Okay, now this is stupid. Okay, I'm going to say this as an intelligence professional, as a career member of the armed forces whose family has served nonstop for 153 years in the United States Armed Forces. This is just stupid. What we have here, look, perhaps people don't quite understand why I am so incensed over this. I want you to imagine in your country that the entire territorial guard, the reserve of the British Armed Forces is mobilized and then is sent first into London to guard London from Londoners. Now, I want you not like they do in Paris with one or two who are on anti-terrorism patrol, or, armed metropolitan police forces who are out on reaction forces to terrorist attacks like you had on 7/7. No, I mean just there, because they have been ordered to just go and walk around the streets, be in every major thoroughfare all over your city, okay, and guard the city from other British citizens and visitors. Now, you would be quite incensed in that. Then I want you to imagine for a minute that the next plan that your prime minister offers is to do this in every major city of the United Kingdom at all, from Belfast to Edinburgh, Manchester to Birmingham, all the way out to Cardiff. Now you understand what's happening in the United States. Even worse, imagine that he orders the Royal Marine Commando to bring almost 2 battalions of Royal Marines into Birmingham for no reason. Now you understand what's happening in the United States is the militarization of your streets. And Donald Trump's justification would be just as crazy as the justification if this happened in your country and the prime minister said, oh, well, there's crime on the streets, and then the only people that they stop in your country is black and brown people. They're doing that in Washington, D.C., and it's against the law. And as one cop said to a man who was sitting on his front step, oh, well, you can't be drinking or smoking on your front step. That is not true. Washington, D.C. city law says you can do any damn thing you want on your front step, including smoking marijuana. The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which, by the way, the right to defend yourself against unlawful search and seizure was in response to the Intolerable Act of 1774, passed down by King George the freaking Third. And now we've got the President of the United States has reached back into history. The freaking Intolerable Act caused the American Revolution, with also the dissolution of representative government in Massachusetts colony at that time. Why are we reaching back 251 years to act like Donald Trump
we're
is
also hearing
Mad
on
King
a more
Donald
serious
the
note for
First?
what these guardsmen will be doing, that they are going to now be carrying rifles and pistols. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, has said that these weapons are for self-defense use only, not for law enforcement.
Self-defense from what? Gelato? Double espressos? Look, Washington, D.C. is a tourist mecca. Tourist mecca. If they're going to be out patrolling with metropolitan police officers, or with the entirety of the FBI, this is the equivalent of Britain emptying MI5 and making them beat cops with New Scotland Yard. They're now on the streets. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearm, Park effing Rangers are now on the street. This is the single stupidest thing that I've seen in American history, and I am a student of American history. But for a guardsman to go on the street, they're not walking out there with M17, M18 pistols. They are patrolling with M4 long rifles and M16s. That's what they're patrolling with. No one is look, the North Hollywood shootout isn't going to break out in front of the Smithsonian to where they need anti-body armor weapons. The threat here is the White House. And as a scholar of counterterrorism who has written multiple books, including New York Times bestsellers on terrorism, there is a phrase for this: state-sponsored terrorism. When the machination, the machinery of the government is turned inward to suppress its own people. That's what these idiot guardsmen are doing out there. And I'm going to D.C. to go walk around and read them the Riot Act, because these young troops, they don't know. They're following orders. But they could get in 2021, Yeah, 2020. When they were ordered in Washington, D.C., Donald Trump ordered his Secretary of Defense to shoot civilian protesters in front of the Capitol, in front of Lafayette Square, right? An immigrant that came to the United States to help us win the revolution. Now I've got soldiers. I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to speak frankly. Soldiers are idiots. Everyone who's ever served knows that the youngest private out there is the dumbest idiot. And you constantly have to have people like me, senior non-commissioned officers, whose sole function is to make sure stupid doesn't happen. And Trump is ordering stupid through the moron who is never qualified to be Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, a guy who commanded one platoon as a junior lieutenant and is now in charge of the largest war machine in the world. And he fires any officer who resists him. I'm sorry if this gets out of control. I'm gonna make a prediction, and I'm awesome at my predictions because I'm never wrong. You will have two things happen. One, you will have American citizens shot, whether by accident, accidental discharge. The M18, M17 pistol, which is the SIG P320, has been known now to accidentally discharge by not even handling it, but by bumping it. So we're going to get a troop who shoots himself, has a negligent discharge as he's trying to unload an M4 without a clearing barrel, or accidentally shoots a civilian because he's ready to do it and he thinks that there's a gun and he's not a cop and it's against the law. The other thing you're going to have is rebellion. You're going to have mutiny. You're going to have officers, senior enlisted who are going to go, hey, whoa, this is not us clearing out sandbags for a flood. This is unlawful and I'm not going to take part in this. They will get court-martialed. And it's right. They should freaking ask for a court-martial because then it'll have to come through a panel that has 250 years of not obeying political whims of people in government, only by the blood, toil, and loss of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But in this particular White House, it's out of control.
And moving away from some of the more dramatic imagery we've seen of these soldiers in US cities, how do the National Guard usually operate? I mean, as most of our UK and European audiences won't know as much about the National Guard and its functions. We, a lot of people in Europe have seen before news stories about National Guard being deployed. A lot of people will think of the LA riots of the 1990s. Right. When is it right to deploy the National Guard and when is it not?
Well, first off, the National Guard does not belong to the President of the United States. The National Guard is a militia force that was set up during the American Revolution, which was decided to be under the control of each of the colonies, then moved on to governors. The governor of each state controls the National Guard. Only in times of national emergency, right? For example, the LA riots, the National Guard was not called out by the president. It was called out by the governor of the state of California in order to assist the Los Angeles Police Department to gain control of the streets because there was rioting, right? We have a lot of rioting in the United States, just as you have soccer hooliganism. We have rioting when a Super Bowl is won. We have rioting when a baseball game is won. And they don't generally bring out the National Guard. Most city police forces are capable of stopping this. But in times of crisis or war, National Guard units are still part of the armed forces of the United States. They can be mobilized for combat deployments overseas. Otherwise, they are only mobilized for real humanitarian crises within our country. For example, the flooding that took place in North Carolina, the recent mass floods that took place in Texas that killed 135 civilians. The National Guard has the trucks, generators, meals ready to eat, the resources that will assist the Federal Emergency Management Agency, an agency Donald Trump just eliminated, to go and help the state gain control and rescue people and move people out of affected areas. 99% of the time, that's the Guard's day job. It is not a force meant to be used within the United States to suppress its own citizens.
And it's a pretty significant difference then from this executive order Trump has signed to create what they're calling specialized units that will deal specifically with public order. It's not quite clear what the structure of that is going to be, but as you say, the US police in most cities do already have the capability to deal with public order events, don't they?
You know, this is mind-boggling. This is mind-boggling. Look, I'm just going to go put this on the table. You are looking at the first steps of a dictatorship. Okay? There has never been a civil response force planned to fly and mobilize U.S. forces into U.S. cities to seize control of U.S. cities. The last time I've heard of anything as crazy as this was in the movie 7 Days in May when they were planning a coup d'etat against the president of the United States, right? Go look it up. Great movie from the 1960s about the military planning to overthrow the government of the United States because they didn't like where negotiations with treaties with Russia was going. Why are we even talking about this? The very fact that there are officers who are not slamming down their freaking stars, people like me, senior enlisted, as I said, I was a senior chief petty officer in the Navy. You are looking at the trappings of my world. We have a phrase in the Navy when you hit a hard place and you're going to have to put your career on line. We call it dropping your anchors. People should be dropping their goddamn anchors over this and making it eminently clear they will not carry out orders like this. But we have a moron as the Secretary of Defense. We have an administration filled with people whose sole function is to exploit government for political gain or personal gain. And they've now neutered the senior leadership of the Pentagon. The first 3 people to be fired at the Pentagon were the black chief of the armed forces, the woman chief of the Navy, and then the judge advocate general, the top lawyer in the armed forces, because they made it clear that the lawyers who were to advise of what is legal and not legal were being reduced to essentially running divorce seminars on Fridays and were not allowed to weigh in on what the armed forces could do that is legal and proper.
It is interesting that they've decided they want to set up specialized public order or policing units with the National Guard, because there is already an established protocol for National Guard to work with law enforcement, isn't it? It's not alien for National Guard to help law enforcement in certain scenarios.
No, and what you're looking at, I'm going to give you guys some global analogies of forces like these. The Saddam Fedayeen, the Berkut in Ukraine before Zelensky, the one that killed their own citizens, the MVD in Russia, which was the internal security force. This is unprecedented. I'm sorry. You're going to be hearing a lot more people like me screaming about this because I don't know what's going on with the political class in the United States, but this is outrageous. And even worse, this is the thing you might have heard about the, what do they call it? The Oath Keepers militia that took over the Capitol on January 6th. This is literally the words that they used in their oath for U.S. service members and law enforcement not to take up arms against American citizens. Nope, Oath Keepers are actually joining, all right, the ICE and other suppression forces in the United States. I can't even believe I'm saying this as an intelligence professional. And I mean, for anyone who hears this, if this were any other country, we would be sounding the human rights alarm. We would be preparing for massive sanctions, and the Defense Department would be wondering whether they would have to evacuate the American embassy or prepare for airstrikes. If this were any other country, I mean, Jesus Christ, it's like we're setting up the Tonton Macoute from Haiti. This is insane. And anyone who is overseas is listening to this who thinks, oh, Donald Trump, yeah, just being a strong man. I want you to imagine the soldiers on the streets of your country because what? Because, because you have a music festival? This isn't security or counterterrorism. This is tyranny, as Thomas Jefferson wrote about it. when he said he swears it took what is it, immortal enmity against anything which provides the tyranny of man. This president is well on his way to trying to rule as a tyrant, and I fear where it's going to go.
And does it set a precedent? I mean, for example, in LA, we saw US Marines being deployed alongside National Guard. Is that something that the US actually allows for in other cities, or was there a very different reason for that there?
It is against the law. That deployment was against the law. It violated the Posse Comitatus Act, which was built for that exact reason, so that the U.S. government could not occupy cities. Another thing, they sent those Marines there to do what? Stand in front of federal buildings. Against what? 99% of the video footage you saw of protests in LA was in a 3-block area. A 3-block area. There was no massive rioting going on all over the city. You had to take a bus, an Uber, or a train to get down to downtown LA and then go to the district where the federal courthouse was to see where there were protests. So somebody explain this to me. It's either being done as made for television, them believing they're showing their red MAGA hat base that they're seizing control of cities, or they're duping all of us, or they're preparing to make this a permanent event. And I swear to God, I fear that this is going to spiral out of control and someone is going to take this to guns. And then we're going to have what? Raging gun battles as people try to defend their homes? I cannot believe we're even having this conversation.
You know, the Trump administration would probably argue that a lot of those troops that were sent, Marines, did not operate outside of federal buildings, which was the clause they used to say it wasn't illegal. But that is something that obviously the government in LA does want to challenge as well.
The Marine Corps, I know the mayor of Los Angeles. The Marine Corps is an offensive fighting force that is part of the American defensive strategy. It had zero. They didn't even send military police units there. It had zero effect on anything. Anything. They had to bring their own water buffaloes to provide water to the troops there. I mean, this was ridiculous. It was a show of force designed to intimidate the people of Los Angeles. Where the hell were those Marines when that city was burning because of out of control wildfires? The National Guard was mobilized by the governor. But do you think the Marines were brought out to do that? And the Marines and the Army have actually had volunteer forces go out to fight fires. No, this was designed to be an intimidation force. We've had situations before where guardsmen have killed American citizens. You all hark back to Kent State. There's always an idiot. There is always someone that will go beyond what the orders are. And for Donald Trump, if he's going to play this game, okay, and he thinks that this is going to be, that he's looking for a Kristallnacht, that he's looking for an excuse to deploy the army to 13 cities, you're talking the basis of civil war. And it's insane. Again, I say this as a calm, rationed intelligence professional. If I were to see this anywhere else, we would be talking about a massive international crisis. And I have a question for your government's leadership. You need to open your mouth about the lack of civil rights in the United States and the lack of human rights in the United States. The special relationship is now going the other way, right? You have Mad King Donald, who is going out of control. Perhaps you could, talk to him about just how it worked out in the end for King George III.
Well, Malcolm Nance, intelligence and foreign policy analyst and expert in national security, thank you very much for joining us today on the Trump Report.
My pleasure.